All right. So far, we have learned the hooks, use state, use effect, and use context. We've learned all about React context and all about React hooks. So, what I'd like to do now is take everything we've learned so far and put them all together. And doesn't it make sense that while we're practicing everything that we've learned so far, we're also going to pick up a few new things and we'll see what you can do with those. So if you look inside this to-do list component, we can see these to-dos are hard-coded. And what I'd like to do is create a context for that to-dos and get that to-dos from context state and output them in here instead of these ones. Then after doing this, after getting all the to-dos from context state, we're going to learn how to add new to-dos and how to remove one of the current to-dos in here. Okay, so first of all, let's start creating a new context for these to-dos. So let's right-click to context folder and create a new file and call this to-do list context. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is import React, so I'm going to say import React from React. And we also need to import a couple more things, create context. And also we want to use state, so we'll import the use state hook. So for the first thing I'm going to do here is export const to-do list context and set it to equal to create context and invoke that so that it creates us our context. Now I'm going to create a functional component to provide this context to all child components. So here I'm going to say const to-do list context provider. And this is going to be an arrow function. Then inside here, we want to take in the children props because remember when we want to output this context, we use the children props. In a class component, the children props are attached to this dot props, but in a functional component, we take them in as a parameter. We take the props object as a parameter and deconstruct it in here and get the children property inside it. All right, so we have those children props now. Okay, so now inside here, we want to use the state to define some data, and that data is going to be an array of to-dos. So I'll say use state, and inside here, we're going to pass an array, and what I'm going to do is just paste in some to-dos here. I'm going to take the same to-dos in the to-do list component. So let's just copy these to-dos, like so, and paste it inside this array. So each to-do is going to be an object, and each one has a text property and a unique ID. So remember, this returns two things inside an array, the state itself and also a function to update the state. So let's grab those const, and then we'll call them to-dos and set to-dos like so. So now we have this data defined. All we need to do is return the provider down here. So let's do that. I'll say return and to-do list context.provider and close it off like so. Then we want to attach the value property so we can pass down the to-dos. So I'll say value, and I'm going to place them inside here like so. Now we're passing down the to-dos, and inside here we want to say children. So now we are wrapping the children inside the provider, and so all child components can access this value property. So the last thing we need to do for this context is export it and then provide this state to the to-do list component. So let's say export default to-do list context provider. So we've exported this context. Now all we need to do is import this into app.js so that we can wrap the components that are needed to use this context inside. So I'm only going to use this inside to-do list component, and I will wrap it with to-do list context provider. But first of all, we'll need to import it at the top. So I will say import to-do list context provider from /contexts/to-do list context provider. So let's wrap this to-do list component with a provider tag. Under the auth context, I'm just going to create a to-do list context provider tag and close that off like so. All right, so now inside our to-do list component, we could consume this context. So why don't we do it? All I'm going to do is use the use context hook again in here. And to do that, I'll just say const, and then we want the to-dos property from to-do list context. So I'm going to destructure that, and that's equal to use context. We're going to grab this from to-do list context. So inside here, I will say to-do list context. Now we need to import it. So I'm going to say import to-do list context from. And under the context folder, I'm going to import to-do list context, like so. Okay, so we have accessed this to-dos array in here. Now all we need to do is, instead of outputting these, we want to map through the to-dos and output those dynamically instead. So first of all, let's open up a set of curly braces, and inside of here, again, I'm going to use ternary operators to output to-dos. So I'm going to say to-dos.length, then question mark. If to-dos array has length, that means if we have any to-dos, in this case, I'm going to output all to-dos to the browser. So I'm going to say to-dos.map. And then for each to-do, we want to output a template. So I will say to-do, then let's open up a function, and we want to return a template for each to-do. And that's just going to be this p tag. Let's copy one of them and paste it in. Okay, we still want to keep this style based on the theme, but instead of outputting this text right here, we want to output the text of the to-do. Remember, we have a property called text for each to-dos. So in here, I'm going to say to-do.text to output text for each to-do object. And we need to attach unique key props to each list element. I'm going to use ID property for each to-do. I will say key is equal to to-do.id. Okay, so if this to-dos array has a length, we're going to output these to-dos. Otherwise, if it doesn't have any to-dos, let's put a semicolon in here. We're going to say you have no to-dos in a div tag, like so. So if we have any to-dos, we're going to map over that to-dos array and output them. And if we don't have any to-dos, we are going to say you have no to-dos. Okay, so that's it. So let's delete that stuff right there. And we'll save all this now and see if it works. All right. Well, that's fine. We can see all of this data right here, and everything still works. Whew. What a relief, right? So now we are grabbing all of these to-dos from context state. And it is pretty simple. We've just created a to-do list context in here, and then inside this context, we've defined a state. and it has some to-dos inside it. Then we grabbed those to-dos in the to-do list component using this use context hook and output them onto the browser. All right, so in the next lesson, we're going to learn how to add new to-dos and then delete one of the current to-dos from this to-dos array. So we'll take a short break here and come back in the next lesson.